Hey makers, this is Dhruvin and today I come up with third episode of my new segment called Talk with Devs. This is the segment where we are talking with the industry expert and learning something new from them. Today's session also one of the interesting session. Today we are going to talk about process mining and process advisor, and to present this session today with us we have Mr. Ilya Fainberg. So I would like to welcome Ilya on my show. Hi Ilya, how are you?
Hello, how you doing?
I'm doing absolutely well. So first of all, a very warm welcome to my show and thank you so much for your valuable time. Today definitely we are going to learn something new and something amazing cool thing. So today's session is going to be a very good learning session, and audience will get to know many new things from this session. So thank you so much for coming on my show.
Thank you much for inviting me to the show. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. All right. So let me just start with the basic intro for Ilya. So he's a senior program manager at Microsoft, and currently he's a part of Microsoft 365 research and development team, and he's working on the cloud to make it better for customer with Microsoft Power Platform and Dynamics 365. And he has a huge 20 plus years of experience overall with this IT industry, and he's a very active on his LinkedIn as well as Twitter account. So let me just open up his LinkedIn account. You can follow him because he's uploading very good content on his LinkedIn along with the Twitter. And don't worry, I will provide the links as well in the description box. So you can follow Ilya on his Twitter and LinkedIn account. And moving forward, whatever update that he has, we will get to know more from him if we follow him on his social media account. So now, without me talking more, let me just ask couple of questions to Ilya, and then we can move forward from there. So, Ilya, basically, we just wanted to know, like, you are doing lots of thing in Power Platform and all. So, when you are not doing Power Platform in your spare time, what you would love to do? That is something I just wanted to ask you.
Well, um, one of the reasons I'm posting so much about this kind of sometimes unusual solutions is that even in my spare time, I don't stop thinking about how I can make things different, how I can make interesting solutions, and how I can leverage the kind of technology around me in interesting and unexpected ways. So it has been something that I've been doing all my life. I'm one of those people who built, um, robots from Legos, and I still do now with my son. We even had a project where we built a smartwatch from scratch, and we built an OS for that smartwatch in JavaScript and TypeScript. So that was an interesting experience. I like traveling. I like flying. I fly a Cessna 172. I don't do that as much anymore. I don't have that much time, but I do it whenever I can. I like traveling by any other means of transportation. I love sailing. Again, unfortunately, I can do it only very rarely, like in the summer, and only if I'm somewhere where it's possible. Certainly less so now that I live in Brussels, but yeah, and with the whole pandemic situation. But yeah, I used to do that much more before that. And in fact, before the pandemic, I used to work in a different division of Microsoft. I used to work at Microsoft Consulting Services for 5, almost 6 years, and I traveled a lot. So I had like 70 flights a year or so sometimes 3 times a week. I've been, well, I wouldn't say everywhere, but in many places, even some places you wouldn't expect you'd go to do Dynamics projects. So that definitely satisfied my need for traveling for a long time. My kids practically grew up. So I actually joined Microsoft when my wife was pregnant with her first child, and basically, since he was 6 months old, he was on flights. He grew up in Rome, in Florence, in Paris, in Tel Aviv, in so many places, and my daughter as well. So essentially, only now when they're going to school, we kind of settle down a bit, and we obviously travel less. Well, obviously because of the pandemic as well, but also because of school and such. But yeah, I mean, in terms of what I like doing, I like building stuff. I like flying. I like traveling. That's kind of the things I like to do. If it's anything around tech, I like doing that.
Yes, yes. Thanks a lot, Ilya, for sharing this, because whenever we are doing this type of show, people wanted to know, like, what whoever the guest is, only they are doing tacky things or they are doing outside the things. So yeah, that answers the question. So thanks for sharing that experience.
I would say one thing that I definitely do also a lot outside of tech is cooking. Um, in fact, I kind of do all the cooking around the house. I don't let
Mm-hmm.
my wife into the kitchen, and I love doing that. And especially now that I spend most of my time at home. Yeah, I love doing that, and I became much better at that in the past 2 years of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Great.
I also enjoyed that.
Great, great, great. Second thing, I've just wanted to know, like, let's say you are in this industry since a very long time, so you have seen something from beginning to something right now. Right now, everything is cloud. Earlier, many things are on premise. So, how you see your overall IT journey? If you can share some of their experience.
I mean, I started out fairly young. My first commercial project was when I was 15 years old. Um, Ironically, it was a CRM system that I built. I built a custom CRM system, which at the time I built with. I used Microsoft Access as a database, and it was built in Visual Basic. Um, it was built to serve a hospital, and later on, I also adapted it to serve like the ambulance services, like emergency services, to book patients and deal with medical data. From there, I moved on into different areas. I worked a lot on industrial automation. I worked in nuclear energy, kind of industrial automation in that space. Um, and a lot of it was like embedded devices, like embedded Linux devices, custom OSs, control. So I was as far from the cloud as is humanly possible. So I was kind of more on the edge computing area. Um, but the whole idea of doing kind of something somewhere, I mean, at the time it was kind of Web 2.0. I think the closest
Yes.
one, the closest idea to the cloud, was always exciting to me. I didn't necessarily like love the technology of the web, like HTML, JavaScript, and such. The whole idea that we don't need to have large boxes at home that do the processing and do all the computing, and that we can have applications that run somewhere. I mean, the whole concept of the cloud wasn't really there anymore, but the concept of I would say the private cloud was somewhere in the air quite a while. Actually, I was um, after moving away from industrial automation, one of the first places I worked at as a C# developer at the time was for a company that was in developing cloud financial applications. The cloud there was basically a couple of servers which run at the same office where the company was. So it wasn't very robust. But despite that, we were developing applications which were kind of built as cloud native. So they were built as like services oriented with web interfaces, and in such a way that automatically and can be accessed by business customers, which at the time were banks and other financial institutions. And that worked quite well. So that was like very early stages of the cloud. And when that was starting to develop into something more formal, came out with cloud solutions, first Amazon and then Microsoft with Azure. I realized that this is where I want to be. So at the time, I was already in the kind of business automation space, in the ERP space. I did some work with SAP, with Oracle, and eventually kind of moved into the Dynamics space. And yeah, I mean, since September 2011, we started moving into the cloud. So you could see how the space is forming rapidly. So like I mean, our first uh, cloud version of Dynamics was the 2011 version, right? Which became cloud in some regions. I actually don't even think that it was available globally at the time. I think it was already available globally, and it's been 10 years, right? And now, I mean, you don't even hear about customers which work on premises. I mean, some of them still exist. Some of them are either legacy customers or customers that, for whatever regulatory reason, have to have their data on premises, or with some maybe countries with restrictive um, policies around that. But even then, I personally participated in few projects where we worked in the country where, they said we're not allowed to have personal data of citizens stored in the cloud. And we went with all our documentation, with all our information that we have about security and compliance and all that. We presented our case to government bodies, and we got approval to move on with those projects. And that was just several years ago. And following that, those countries changed their laws and their regulations to allow having the cloud to participate basically in all areas of all
Mhm.
industries in those countries, in financial industries, in government, even military, so on. So there was a rapid expenditure of that whole space, and kind of I always knew I want to be part of that space. And fortunately, by the time it became a big thing, I was right. And thought was from some point, well, at some point it became a goal of mine. Basically, ever since we started to move to the cloud with 2011. So in 2014, I joined Microsoft, and I mean, then you will still have quite a lot of on-premises projects, but the transition to the cloud was so rapid that now, I mean, we have this thing when we still get asked questions about on-premises dynamics or on-premises systems. I struggle to find, people among my colleagues who can tell me that information, because no one remembers
Yes,
anymore how things used to be done. So it was such a rapid
absolutely.
progression. Yeah, and I'm so happy that,
Yes.
I'm part of that world now, and all the opportunities that it gives people. Like, yeah,
Yes, yes, absolutely.
even
Truly said, Ilya. Like, even even I can see, like, when I started my career in 2015, I just work a little bit in on-premise, and rapidly, suddenly, everything moved to cloud. So, you know, to see this journey, I can see, like, within 6, 7 years, many things change vastly.
yeah, indeed, yeah, it's been an amazing journey. And even on a personal level, like, you can see that some of the kind of little projects that I post on LinkedIn are about like personal productivity, but they leverage components which 5 years ago would be unthinkable for an individual to even have access to. Now you have Power Automate Desktop as part of Windows, essentially, so you can do a lot of stuff for free
Yes,
for personal productivity. And a few years back, it would be some kind of a multi-million enterprise application and such. I mean, we still have kind of those customers which, well, it's mostly like government organizations and banks that still have those huge mainframes that run some kind of an AI on premises somewhere in that organization, and to produce, recommendations and results about customers, and things like that. But even then, even them now transition into more cloud-oriented solutions, simply because well, first of all, it's just better in terms of the quality of the data that they get, but also you don't have to maintain all this huge infrastructure, huge expensive infrastructure in somewhere, in your basement or in your own data center, which is just amazing, honestly.
Yes, yes, truly said, truly said. So yeah, thanks a lot for sharing this overall journey. Like, it's glad to know this everything because you have a very huge experience in this industry. Like when I was in 12th grade, you were already started in uh, dynamic space. So yeah, glad to know all of this past
Now I feel
history.
old.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that experience. Okay. Ilya, just wanted to know a few more things like what's your future plan like with respect to technology, if you are planning anything moving forward, if you can just share that thing with us, that would be great.
um, there's a reason I'm talking a lot of about Power Automate and Power Apps and Power Platform, because I see that as um, kind of the future that we were expecting, we as developers and we as, I would say, people in the technology industry were expecting for a long time. The whole concept of writing code without writing code is not new, right? You had like applications that would allow you to point and click and build apps since like the late 90s. Okay, but they were never. First of all, they were never any good, to be honest. And second, they were never uh, as integrated with all the other components that we have right now in the cloud, and provide as much um, kind of abilities and as much features as we have today. So before that, let's say if we would take like Power Automate in the box as a separate product, okay, that's a nice product. But the reason it's a nice product is not because you can point and click and put actions on the page. It's nice because it has over 600 connectors built in that allow you to do pretty much anything, connect to anything, get the data from anything, write data to anything, process the data in pretty much any way you want, and do that by pointing and clicking and maybe writing some expressions. That's the revolution, right? That's the difference between what we had, the attempts that we had 20 years ago and the kind of ecosystem that we have right now. And the same thing with Power Apps. Um, Now with the all the features that we have in Power Apps, building web applications and building web portals and building mobile applications with Power Apps, Canvas apps, I mean, that has never been easier. Again, Power Apps is not the first time when you can build a mobile app by point and click, right? Uh, Apps that allow you to do that existed before, but it's the first time that you have the point and click part, but also that entire ecosystem around that allows you to build actual meaningful rich applications that actually provide business value. That's kind of the power behind that, and that's why I'm so happy being part of that kind of product and part of that ecosystem. And that's the reason why I'm in that ecosystem and why I think that it is the future.
Yes, yes. Thanks a lot for sharing this with us, Ilya. Now, one last thing I just wanted to ask you, like, for the book that you are planning for the future, if you
Uh,
can just talk few words about that, that would be great.
yes. So I thought that writing 200 characters post on LinkedIn is nice, but writing a 300-page book is probably better. So yes, I'm now writing a book about Power Platform. It's going to be around Power Platform in general, so the administration of Power Platform, how to build applications with Power Platform. It will cover Power Automate and Power Apps mostly, also Dynamics to some extent. and it will guide people who are kind of familiar with Power Platform of in terms of what that is, from maybe not knowing much about it to being able to build out entire infrastructures, enterprise level infrastructures based on Power Platform, on Dynamics, on Power Automate, on Power Apps. And aside from this practical technical knowledge of how to do stuff, how to do thing A, B, and C, it also have a section about actual analysis of business cases, of use cases that I've encountered over kind of my career. We'll go into analyzing the most cases and how to actually implement Power Platform in such a way that it answers business cases and how it resolves those complicated scenarios. So it's going to be, yeah, a combination of both technical, practical stuff and also analysis of actual real-world business cases.
Perfect. I'm really excited for that book, and everyone who is listening to us, like whenever that book will be launched, I will provide the link in the description box as well. So always check the description box wherever you are watching this video. If it's available, it will be available in that section. So thanks a lot, Ilya, for sharing that experience with us. Now, one last thing, like what would be the next half of the session that you are going to cover today? If you can just talk few things about it, and then we are good to start with the session.
So, process mining, what is it for? Um, Process mining, essentially, it's a class of products in a way to get more information about how your processes work. So you typically have in your organization process that do lead organization or lead management or sales processes or dealing with manufacturing or retail processes, account management, case management, whatever else. And you know how those processes work, what are the steps, but you don't always know what is the efficiency of the processes, meaning that how much time does it take to do every step for every person in every situation, in every department, for example, in a different branch. You typically don't have that information. It is somewhat more common to collect that information, for example, in customer service scenarios where we have things like SLAs, but even that covers just one aspect of how efficient the process is. And I mean, I think customer service is a good example here because it's one of the processes that is typically, in terms of time constraints, we tend to have the most focus on in terms of efficiency. And process mining essentially brings the same ideology or the same opportunity to improve any other process as well. So whether it's a financial process, a back office process, a front office process, doesn't matter. We can let essentially the product for process mining to understand the data that comes out of our system and get insights into how efficient those processes are for every system and additional slices based on that. So the way it would normally work with process mining is that you, let's say, perform an invoice management process, right? You get invoices, you process them, it goes for payments, it goes for approvals. You have different processes there, and you have different people performing processes within that large process, different tasks within that process, and you have different departments working on that process, right? So what you're left with typically is, well, if we deep dive into it, you have timestamps that says John Smith did, accepted the invoice at this time. It took him this much time to work on that, and at this time, it was transferred to a different person for approval, and then it took that much time. So this is data that you typically can get out of any system. Doesn't mean if it's Dynamics or Salesforce or Oracle or whatever else. Typically, you do have that data. If not for your own records, then at least for compliance purposes. And the great thing about the whole process mining scene is that we can now leverage AI to take this data and build essentially a map of the process automatically, and map on that process every step of the way, how much time it took, what was done, slicing per, let's say, role within the process, or per department, or per individual, or other kind of slicing that we need to understand the overall efficiency of that process. So we don't no longer need to develop special SLAs or special rules, special processes to get that information. That information can be analyzed and can be received through that process of process mining. And within Power Automate, we now have a new feature, which is called process mining, which is part of the process advisor offering that we have. And that allows you to essentially download information from any system using direct query. So any data source that is supported by the direct query can be used to get information from that system into process mining and to understand the efficiency of each process. Right. So why would you do that, right? Why would you invest the time doing process mining and implementing that and doing that? Typically, or when you build a business, you want the business to be as efficient as possible. When you do digital transformation processes, you want to understand if that transformation actually gave you any value. And in general, you want to always be monitoring and understanding where and how your processes can be improved, and in which scenarios. And process mining gives you an easy window into that to understand at every point, almost for every day, of how your organization performs overall and how different elements within your as well. There is, I think, not a lot of people are aware of this entire this segment of products, right? But yeah, it does exist for a while. There's a few other solutions on the market. I think the most well-known are probably you have Celonis, you have Process Gold, which I think was acquired by UiPath a few years back. And you have a few other solutions as well on the market. And our intention with Power Automate, Process Advisor, and Process Mining to enter this market, to bring this capability to the hands of makers and to the hands of people who are not necessarily, code developers or data scientists or things like that. It was typically the case that process mining was reserved for people who are, experts in that particular area, experts in the area of data, and understand well the tools that are required to build the models that are needed, and in general, get any kind of result from that process that makes sense, and to act on that result, most importantly. So the nice thing about what we are trying to do within Power Automate is that we are trying to integrate that not as some kind of separate product, but as part of the wider Microsoft Cloud, and specifically within Power Platform. So we use the same technologies and components that you're familiar with. We store the data in Dataverse. We use Power Query to get the data. So if you're familiar with that from any other product, like Power BI, for example, or any other of our Insights products, then you know how to get data into process mining, and you know how to process that. And in general, we aim to achieve a situation where you can get a result and you can get insights without the participation of your admins or developers or whatever else. So it is something that can be available for the maker that typically works in Power Platform. So what processes you can cover, right? As I mentioned, essentially you can cover any process I give a few examples. Can be customer service, can be invoice processing, can be for manufacturing processes, can be lead qualification, sales processes, really anything. I would say any process that has defined steps that have timestamps. Essentially, that's the bare minimum information that you need for process mining is person A did this at this time, right? If you have that information, you have already enough for process mining. Of course, beyond that, in order to slice information and get more out of it, you might want to have information about where the person works, what department, what branch, on what process, what is the person's role, and other parameters that will allow you to filter out and find the data that you need within the process mining. So I thought that today we can look into a demo of how would that work. And we're going to look specifically at the invoice processing solution. So we actually have a demo, a spreadsheet with sample data that even you, if you would like, can use to build the same process that we're going to demonstrate today. Let me switch to my browser and we will start doing that. So if you go to Power Automate, you will notice that we have here the process advisor. And when you click on the create a new process, there's the options. There's the recordings and there's the data, which is currently in preview. So the recordings, I think we had it for a while now. The recordings essentially allows you to use Power Automate Desktop to record the actions that you do on the desktop and analyze the process that you perform physically as a user, and then understand how that process can be made more efficient and how much time in general it takes to perform that process. Essentially, you can sit down your business users and let them do what they do and record what they do and understand based on that, how they perform the process and how it can be optimized. But now we also have the data. So data is actually the new data mining feature, and that allows you, as mentioned, get that information, but at a larger scale and based purely on data. So you'll not be looking at just one person clicking the mouse and doing whatever they do at work. You'll be looking at scale at an entire department or entire company. Like it can be thousands or millions of records that you look at the same time and understand the performance and the efficiency of a certain process. So let's look at the invoicing process. If you want to do that process yourself, by the way, you also can. We even have here a button to get the sample data. So I'll be using that same sample data. And if you want to repeat that process, you can with exactly the same data I would use right now. All right. So if you ever did anything data related in Power Platform, that should seem quite familiar. So the Power Query interface that allows you to get data from a lot of different sources. You can get it from an Excel spreadsheet. You can get it from Dataverse. You can get it from, a SQL database, SAP, whatever else. And even if you want to understand if your Salesforce works efficiently or not, you can also do that as well. So in this case, I'll go with the Excel option. And I'm going to just upload a new file. I could use that option to link an existing file, but I'm going just to upload a new file. All right. So we have information. We have here a table in the Excel, and I'm just going to go ahead and take that first table. Click next. And now I have here this, again, familiar UI from any kind of type of data operations that you ever did with Power Platform. And here you can add additional columns. You can choose the columns that you want. You can filter out columns. So you, for example, can filter out only data based on location or based on role or based on specific resource if you want. So you can really play a lot with the data even before it comes to the mining process. But in this case, I'm going to leave the data as is. So I'm going to use all of it. But one thing that I have to do is I have to map it to the process mining entities. And we have two kinds of entities here. So process mining works with either activity logs or event logs. The difference here is that activity logs is something that has a start time and end time, and event log is something that has only a start time. So meaning that if you have activities like, let's say, a task that you started at time and finish at a different time, then that would be an activity log. If you have events, so for example, stage 1 in the lead qualification process was started at this time, stage 2 at this time, stage 3 at this time, and so on, then you have event logs. So you have a series of events that happen, and you know when each event happens, and therefore you know when the previous stage has ended.
Mhm.
So
Ilya,
yeah,
I just have one quick question here about this activity log
sure.
and event log. So these are the two out of the box Dataverse entity which is created when we set up any of the process mining for the first time. Is it correct?
Yes, so those are the so process mining saves its data within the Dataverse.
Okay.
And activity log and event log are the entities that it uses to do so, right?
Okay. Perfect. That answers
Yeah,
my question. Thanks.
yeah. And kind of we are whatever the data we import, we map to those one of those entities. So in this case, well, if we look at the table, I have start dates, but I don't have end dates, right? So that means that from the point of view of process mining, even though I'm importing activities, right? Well, I think that is name activity. From the point of view process mining, it is actually an event because it has only one start date. So we have here two other fields. We have the activity name and the case ID. So the case ID is not necessarily case ID, right? Doesn't have to be a case, but it is a unique identifier of the process that you're performing. And the activity name is the name of the activity. So the name of whether is it a stage or an actual activity or something else that happens within that process. So think of it as case ID is an instance of a process, like one lead qualification process for lead A, let's say. And the ID for that process would be the case ID. And the activity name is the name of all the stages or all the tasks that I would perform within that instance of a process, okay, within each process. So in my case, the start time would be this, the start time. Well, fair enough. The case ID would be easily enough case ID. And the activity name would be activity name. Very convenient. Of course, in whatever data you export from another system that might be called differently, that might be called like stage name or task name or something else entirely. But the point is that it is something that you do, kind of an identifier of what you do within a process, and the case ID is the identification of that process. And the start time is the time when you start that activity within the process. Okay, so I have that mapped. Now, the fact that I'm mapping those three fields doesn't mean that those are the only fields I use. Those are the fields that I use to, or rather, that process mining uses to assess the efficiency of the process, to build out the map of the process. But I'm also taking with me all the other fields, the location, the role, the resource name. So I'm taking those with me because I'm going to want to use those as ways to filter out certain data. So I might want to look at the efficiency of the process, but not for all the data that I've imported, but only for, let's say, Seattle or for San Diego or for Riley, right? Or for all the invoice processor roles, right? So I'm going to leave in all this data to filter by going forward. Okay, so I'm not going to do anything else. I think I'm done with the data, and I'm going to save and analyze. It is going to take a bit of a while to save it, and even longer to analyze it. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we could wait at the time, but quite frankly, I don't really want to. I did that a bit in advance,
Mm-hmm.
so we already have that result.
Okay,
Very
okay.
nice.
No worries.
Um, all right. So this is the result. Now, what do we actually see on the screen? Um, we see here, I think the kind of the main point here, right? We see here the map of the process um, based on the data that we have imported, and we see here, well, for example, on those blocks, the names of the activities within each process. So this is kind of the I would say the average representation of our process. So this is not one specific instance of a process, not the work on a certain specific invoice. This is the average for all the um, times we worked on any invoice and all the activities that we have performed and how much time it took for each activity. So we can see all that on screen. This is kind of the uh, maximum size of the process that it can take. It can take. But it also can work in different ways. So we see here there's a lot of errors, right? And it probably cannot be that all those activities are done all the time. It's most likely that some processes are done with certain activities and some are done with other activities. And for that, we actually have here an indication which is called variance. So variance is a way for the process mining tool to tell us that there are 11 ways in which a process can be completed based on the data that we have imported. Meaning that for all the data that we had, that we imported about invoice management, different resources in different locations, or I don't know, based on some parameter, apparently have performed the same process in 11 different ways. Now, there can be a legitimate reason to do that, but also that can be your first indication of whether your process is efficient or not, right? Of course, I mean, there can be a perfectly legitimate way to do one process in many different ways because it depends on parameters, based on conditions. That's perfectly fine. But for example, if you have a more straightforward process and you don't expect it to be performed in 11 different variations or even more, that would be kind of your first red flag that your process, perhaps on a very fundamental level, is not being done correctly by the people who are supposed to execute. So we see here also the amount of cases that we have imported and the amount of activities. So activities are kind of it's not the total amount of activities, it's the total amount of the types of activities that we have, right? Um, okay, so in here we can see additional information about variations, variance by frequency and by time. So we see that there's a certain variant that has been used 66 times, but there's a lot of different variants, variant 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, that are used only once. So that again, that gives you some information that if you look at the first four, let's say, something like 90% of cases, all this process is being done in four different ways. But for some reason, some either exception or some inefficiency, or maybe something that is someone just doing wrong, causes that process to balloon to 11 variants, which again might not be what you're looking for. We can also look at the variance by time. So we see that you have uh, variant 11, which takes the longest, and by a long shot, by the way. So there's apparently one variant which takes the most time to execute, and by a lot. So again, that tells you that something is not entirely correct here, right? But okay, let's do some more. Let's try to understand where is that coming from. So we can do here in filters, we can filter out data based on dates, based on the case ID. So we can select a specific case ID. We can select by activity, um, uh, or we can look by the fields that we have imported. So a role, resource, and location. So let's look at the process by roles. So let's take a look at the process from the point of view of an invoice approver. How would that look? Okay, so we see that the invoice approver is responsible for 67% of the cases. They would use 10 activities, and they would do the process in 10 different variants. But we still see here that there's this uh, dark red process for refund with special voucher, which takes by far the longest to execute. And this has been done by this role. Okay, let's switch to the other role for invoice processor and see how they work. Okay, so we see that they are also involved with that very, very long process. And they are involved apparently in all cases, in all activities, and in all variants. So the invoice processor, I understand that it is a role that is supposed to be involved in any case or in any invoice processing, regardless of or the type of the variant or whatever else. Fine. So I don't see a problem here. That seems to be perfectly natural. Let's go and look into maybe specific roles, like specific people, specific people, how they work. Let's look at Abby, for example. So Abby, we see that is responsible for 12 of the cases. She has performed cases in 5 different variants, which seems to be a bit a lot. And we also see that she has this very long process for refund a special voucher. Okay, I mean, is it just her that does that process, or maybe someone else also does that? Let's look at the next one, the Addison. Okay, so we see that Addison's process is much more efficient in terms of time. So we see that it takes us 3.2 days, which is way lower than the 7 days that we had on average. And the cases are performed in 4 different variants, so in less variants than Abby, and also more cases were performed at the same time. And we don't have here the refund with special voucher. So that's interesting. It's weird that one resource it does use this long process and one doesn't. So is it like they work according to different rules? I don't know. Let's look at locations. Maybe that's where the mystery unfolds. So let's look at San Diego. Okay, so the way San Diego works is that their processing in average takes 8.6 days. That's way above the average. That's quite long. And it seems that they use extensively the refund with special voucher activity, and also other activities which take a long time, more than in other organizations. And apparently they use 10 variants, so they use almost every possible variant in their location. Okay, let's look at the same data, but for San Francisco. Okay, that is interesting. So San Francisco, for all that data, takes less than half the time to manage invoices. And it does not use that very complicated process with the refund special voucher. And it also has a much more simplified process. So instead of using 10 variants of the same process, use only 5, which tells us that apparently the difference between resources is not because they use different rules to do the same thing, but because they're apparently located in different locations. And this is more of a problem of specific branch that uses a different process to process invoices. And therefore, in San Diego, you have the same invoice processing taking 8 days, and in San Francisco, it takes only 3 days. Let's take a look at Seattle. Seattle is even more efficient. They do things only in 5 different variants. They handled essentially almost half of all the cases, and they have done that in, well, much less time than San Diego, and even less time than San Francisco. So we see that based on that, the difference between the efficiency of the process of how it being executed is apparently based on location. So we see that different branches in different physical areas perform the same process differently. Now, why are they doing that? Well, unfortunately, this is not something that this data can tell us. So, but what it can tell us is that we probably need to go to San Diego, or rather call them, and understand how they're processing invoices, why is it different than the way it's been done in any other location, and whether we can somehow optimize the process to make them more in line with other locations, because the difference is huge, right? It's 8 days there versus 3 days in any other location. So that tells us, well, we spent like what 50 minutes doing the data analysis, and we found out how a big chunk of our organization works incredibly inefficiently. And now we have the tools that we need, or the insights that we need, to go to that organization and try to investigate and fix the processes. And the nice thing about it is that we can save this data, and we can come back to it later. So we can make changes in the process in San Diego. We can see how that reflects. We can perform that analysis again on new data that comes, let's say, next month or next quarter. And we can compare the report from now and the report from from a month from now, or the next new report that we get. And we can see how the process improved and where specifically improved. We can see whether they have changed the process, whether they are still using this activity for refund with special voucher, which took a long time. And even if they do, and if they maybe they have to for some reason, does it take less time to do? And have they simplified their processes in such a way that they use less process variance and, well, at least in line with other organizations, right? So right now they use 10 variants, and all other organizations use 4 or 5. Again, we want to simplify and make it easier for them and better for our customers at the end, right? As a customer, I also don't want to wait for my invoice to be processed for 8 days if it can be processed in 2. So in a nutshell, this is kind of a large overview of the process mining. We also have here additional information about time analysis. So we can do more of a deep dive of how much time does it take for every operation to perform. And we can also apply here the same filters that we applied in the other tab for the process. And for convenience, we can also change here the unit in which we made the calculation. So if we change it to hours, let's say, then in here we will see the information in hours. And we see that, again, this refund with special voucher takes the most time to do. So on average, it takes 28 hours, which is way more than any other activity that we have here on average. Yeah, so that's it in a nutshell. That's process mining in a nutshell. There's, of course, much more that you can do with it, and what you can do with it depends on the kind of data that you're getting. But the point is that it enables you to finally stop building specialized tools to be able to understand the efficiency of your process, and just take the data from the system as is, transform it, and import it into process mining, see the efficiency of your processes, act on it, re-engineer, refactor, make changes, and come back to it again and see if those changes have yielded better results, same results, worse results, and again, act on it in a kind of cyclical process. And that's improving your overall organization.
Yes, absolutely well said, Ilya. Like, this is something which is really helpful for improving our different processes that are in the organization. I just have a couple of questions with respect to this process mining. So let's say for an example, this month I uploaded my data and I got this process map and I just analyzed everything. Now next month I come again, I improve my processes, I got the different set of data. Is there any way that we can compare both the previous data and the current data side by side? Is there any functionality which is available?
Well, aside from right now, aside from maybe visually comparing them side by side, I mean, you have the history of the reports, so you can compare the
Mhm.
reports side by side. But right now, there's no real like, diff button to compare the previous one and the next one. This is hopefully something that we may have in the future. I mean, it's something that you can technically do with the data, of course, but there's no like button in the interface to do
Okay.
that right now.
Okay, okay. No worries, that's fine. A second important thing that I want to ask here about the data. While when we are doing the process mining, we are passing some sort of columns to our Power Query. So
Mhm.
any advice that, if anyone has any existing system in place, what type of data they should capture for a better result of process mining?
Well, I don't think that you even need to capture special kind of data because you can pretty much work with the data that you already have in the system. So let's say, well, in Dataverse, right? If you have information about, let's say, a lead qualification process, and for that lead qualification process, you have information about the activities related to that lead, or dates of when you passed through different stages of that lead, then that's already enough to do process mining, right? And you typically do have the data in the system already. If you don't, or if you don't manage that, if you don't manage your business data in such a way that you record activities, that of course will make it a bit more complicated. But really, as long as you record anything that you do with dates,
Mhm.
and those dates are associated with some kind of a process ID or an activity, then you're good to go. It's
Okay.
very flexible in that regard. And typically you can use the data that you already have in pretty much any business applications, I would say.
Mhm. Okay, thanks. That answers my question. Third thing which I wanted to ask here about, when we started the process mining at the very beginning step, the first option was to upload the data and second was the recorder. So is it something, if you can just give some highlight what recorders do, like is it something which captures the user screen of with the different processes and then prepare the process map? If you can just give some idea on that part, that would be great.
Yeah, that actually gives you a very similar results to what you see now, but just based on the screen capturing that you do when doing some process on your computer, right? So essentially, it uses Power Desktop. So Power Desktop has built-in capability to record what you click on, where you move your mouse, what's been shown on the screen, and identify those elements as not just as images, but as actual elements, as buttons, as checkboxes, as whatever else. So it can understand what you're doing in from the functional point of view.
Okay.
And this data is being taken into Process Advisor and essentially resulting in something that's similar to what we have in process mining, but based on the actions of an individual, rather than process mining that gives you a result based on the actions of many, of thousands,
Exactly.
billions. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for giving that insights. And last thing, Ilya, like for this process mining and advisor, do we need any additional licenses apart from regular Power Automate license? If you can just give some idea on that part.
So the process advisor is a premium license. So I mean, if you have a premium Power Automate license, that's enough. There's no additional licensing for process advisor. Process mining, actually, I think it's right now, because it's in preview, it's not even a premium feature. So it's even much more accessible for you to play with and test out.
All right. Thank you so much, Ilya, for this insight. And the session is really helpful for everyone who is just stepping in that step into process mining and process advisor thing. So it's a full-fledged session with the overall information. Thanks for sharing all this information with us, and hope the audience is also having more idea on process mining and process advisor. So I request everyone, if anyone has any question, feel free to add into comment section, or also you can directly reach out Ilya. I have provided his LinkedIn address as well as Twitter Twitter account in the description box. So feel free to reach out. And thank you so much, Ilya, once again for coming to my show and sharing this amazing session with the audience. Thank you so much for your valuable time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to talk about. Well, if you ever read any of my posts on LinkedIn, you know that I'm happy to talk about Power Platform and Power Automate specifically for any amount of time.
Definitely, definitely, Ilya. And I would love to have a more and more session with you into upcoming future as well, according to your availability, because you are doing amazing community work. And I truly believe like it is something that is to be spreaded everywhere, and everyone should know about these new things, and how efficient it is to solve the business problems. So yeah, definitely we will have some more sessions as well in the future. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
All right. So, with this, I just wanted to start the ending ceremony. So, let me just share my screen here. So thank you so much everyone for being so far with us. If you are for the first time to my channel, make sure you hit subscribe and press the bell notification to never miss any updates from my channel. I'm regularly updating content related Power Platform on my channel. So stay tuned with me, and if you have any question, feel free to drop out your question in the comment section. And I have shared all the links of social media handles of Ilya as well as mine in the description box, and in future as well, like when Ilya will launch his new book, the link is also available in the description box. So keep checking the description box from wherever you are watching this session. So with this is Dhruvin signing off. See you in the next episode with some amazing content. Till then, have a great day. Goodbye.